I think it's time to start. So, αρχίζουμε τη δεύτερη συνεδρία. Είμαι ο πρόεδρος.
Μια στιγμή παρακαλώ.
Does it? Do you hear me? Yeah, okay. Okay, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our first...
No, μια στιγμή.
Okay, I get my Greek. Πρώτος συνομιλητής θα είναι ο Brian Joseph, professor of historical linguistics from the Ohio State University, who will be talking on the topic linguistic contact in ancient Balkans. We are starting a little bit late, so it will be, is it okay to continue until, yeah. So, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Vít, for the introduction, and thank you to Yorgos for organizing such an interesting and stimulating conference. My topic, as you see, is linguistic contact in the ancient Balkans, especially be examining the question of whether there was a Sprachbund, but my answers actually will be something else, because we'll see there's very little evidence, and I will turn to a slightly different topic as I move along. A Sprachbund, like language cluster, was argued for in the ancient Eastern Mediterranean by my mentor, one of my mentors, Calvert Watkins, in a 2002 article on ancient Anatolia. He talked about especially Hattic, Hurrian, and various Indo-European Anatolian languages as forming a linguistic area. And that raises the question of whether there might be other linguistic areas to examine in the ancient Eastern Mediterranean. And a possible venue, of course, is the Balkans. The region in ancient times met one very key precondition for a Sprachbund, namely language diversity. There are a number of ancient languages in the Balkans. They're not all of equal antiquity as far as we know, and there's considerable uncertainty as to affinities and descendants, if any. But we can name several: Dacian, Moesian, Greek, Illyrian, whatever it may have been, Liburnian, very sparsely attested, ancient Macedonian, as we've heard some discussion of already, Mesapic, Mysian, Paeonian, Phrygian, pre-Greek, whatever it was, Thracian as well. And there are traces of other languages, continental Celtic, for instance, some Germanic. Some have argued that Armenian was present in the Balkans prehistorically, and conceivably even Anatolian, Indo-European, was funneled through the Balkans into Anatolia. That's one hypothesis. I leave out Old Church Slavonic because even though it's old, it was attested too recently to be considered here. So we have a number of languages in the ancient Balkans, and it's reasonable to wonder whether they formed some sort of linguistic area. But there are some problems. Typically, a Sprachbund is defined by reference to some number of shared features that are not a matter of inheritance, nor universality, nor chance, but rather convergences caused by language contact. And typically, there is demonstrable convergence, and convergence means that there's divergence from earlier states. Unfortunately, our knowledge of most of these prehistoric Balkan languages that I just listed, from a detailed linguistic structural point of view, is really minimal, to the point where there's really just one convergent feature that's found in many of these languages, and that has to do with the merger of the Proto-Indo-European voiced aspirates, the DH, with the plain voiced stops, the D. And this is reasonable, or this is a convergent only if they're Indo-European languages. That's a reasonable assumption for most of these. And if, and this is a really big if, the proposed etymologies that are correct, and these etymologies are usually based on just guesswork and speculation, so it's very hard to know exactly what we are dealing with. Nonetheless, we find evidence of a merger between Indo-European voiced aspirates and non-aspirated voiced stops in many of these languages. The ancient Macedonian bere that was referred to earlier in names like Berenica, the Illyrian form Dewadaya for satyr that Katicic refers to, Tsitsilis as well. If it's connected, and this is where the uncertainty about etymology comes in, if the first part, dewa, is connected with ancient Greek thuo, meaning to rage, and if the root is an Indo-European deu, then dewa shows the deaspiration. Similarly, the Thracian brutos for ale, if it's connected with English broth, actually looks like a good connection. From Indo-European breu would show the same deaspiration. And for facts like this, the contact explanations are certainly plausible. We can construct reasonable explanations involving language contact. If a substratum language, for instance, had a two-stop system, and this system prevailed in language shift due to first language interference, so L1 interference on L2, as substratum speakers shifted to the target languages, maybe in different areas of the Balkans, then we could see why there would be a DH and D merger across an area. Alternatively, if one language innovated and then speakers of other languages interacting with the innovating language accommodated to its pronunciation, we could see again the spread of this feature. And similarly, if there is what can be called reverse interference, where L2, the second language, affects the first language of speakers, it does happen. So if there was reverse interference from a dominant innovating language that had no distinction between the D and the DH, and that was spoken as a second language, then if that affected the first language of speakers who originally had such a distinction, we could end up with an area in which this distinction was eliminated. Now, of these scenarios, the first one involving a substratum would not necessarily point to a Sprachbund, to a linguistic area per se, but it would tell us about prehistoric language contact in the Balkans. The other two, however, involving continued interaction between speakers leading to shifts in the phonology, would be relevant for a Sprachbund because of the continued and ongoing interaction among speakers of different languages. But an important caveat must be noted here. There are non-Balkan languages that show the merger of D and DH, Balto-Slavic, Iranian, Celtic especially. And moreover, there are languages in the Balkans that do not show this merger, Greek being a notable one, nor Armenian if it counts as Balkan. So there's a problem with taking this feature as indicating a Sprachbund, not an overwhelmingly impossible problem, but a problem nonetheless. And what we would want then is more features to look at to see if there is further evidence of convergence beyond this single element of the phonology. But there's a problem here with our knowledge of the pre-Balkan state of these languages, except insofar as they are Indo-European, so that our reconstructions for Proto-Indo-European give us some insight into their starting point, but we actually know so little about these languages that we cannot find other features. They just aren't there in these scraps and bits and pieces that we have for most of these languages. It's also important to ask whether the sort of social conditions that lead to a Sprachbund were present in the ancient Balkans. And here I'm drawing on work that Victor Friedman and I are doing that will be in our book on the Balkan languages coming out next year, where we talk about the conditions for Sprachbund formation. We say that Sprachbunds arise under conditions of sustained, intense, and intimate contact among speakers with multilateral, that is to say mutual, multilingualism. So I speak your language, you speak my language, and the same is true for for lots of different languages, multilaterally, multilingually. So we know that there was contact in ancient times, but what we do not know for the ancient Balkans is the extent and nature of that contact. Was it Sprachbund consistent and Sprachbund conducive contact, or was it merely casual contact? Based on the modern Balkans, the prototype, we might say, for our understanding of a Sprachbund, we expect to see in a Sprachbund structural convergence. But as I said, with so little information to go on about the languages of the ancient Balkans, nothing can be said except of a very speculative nature. For instance, it has sometimes been said that Thracian and Illyrian, or Illyrian we might say, must have had no infinitive in order to explain the absence of an infinitive in Albanian. But that's only as valid as the assumption that one or both of these languages are ancestral to Albanian, which itself is very controversial. And that also involves circularity on top of speculation. We don't have any direct evidence for the status of infinitives in either Thracian or Illyrian. With the modern Sprachbund, the Balkan Sprachbund as our model, we might also expect to find a particular kind of lexical convergence involving conversationally based loanwords. This is what Victor Friedman and I call eric loans, those that are essentially rooted in conversation. And this is a very thinly veiled homage to our friend and mentor Eric Hamp, who is a Balkanist par excellence. But the key idea behind these eric loans is that they emerge out of conversational interactions. Such loans include discourse particles and most notably closed class items that are often thought to be resistant to borrowing, such as pronouns, grammatical markers, adpositions, kinship terms, and the like. Some examples we see in Greek today, babas for dad from Turkish baba. In the Greek of Adrianople, present-day Edirne, during the Ottoman period, this is what I'm referring to here, Roncesvalles, 1911, a really remarkable work. In that highly Greek that was highly affected by Turkish, we find, for instance, bu for this and kim for what? Gibi as a postposition meaning like from Turkish gibi. And outside of that, we find dialectally in Greek belki or belkim meaning perhaps from Turkish. Lots of examples of that sort, which these are the kinds of elements that we classify as eric loans. They emerge out of conversational interaction. And our hypothesis is that that kind of conversational interaction is what leads to the Sprachbund-like convergence. So do we see anything like this in the ancient Balkans? Any example of any instances of these conversationally determined loans? Most of the loanwords that one might identify are material objects or toponyms, thus essentially cultural loans. There's one non-Greek gloss that occurs in Hesychius, which is labeled as Northwest Greek. This is bra for brother, but we can ask whether it's a loan at all, or perhaps a cognate or something else. If it is a loan, however, is it the kind of kinship term loan like baba in the modern Balkans? This is just a little scrap that we might build something on, but it's hard to go much beyond that. So basically, this line of investigation into an possible ancient Sprachbund in the Balkans is essentially a dead end. So we need another approach. So let's shift gears a little bit. There are two Indo-European languages in the Balkans that might allow us to talk about possible Sprachbund conditions, as we know a lot about these languages and about their prehistory, and that's Greek and Albanian. And as it happens, there are a number of features that Greek and Albanian share from the ancient period, centuries and possibly millennia even before the modern Sprachbund, which in our view has its origins in the Ottoman period. So the modern Sprachbund we're setting aside and looking at some features that Greek and Albanian share from way back. We know there was contact between Greek and Albanian due to old loan words. Laker for cabbage from Greek lachanon, moker from meaning millstone from Greek machana, tarogza for helmet from Greek torakion. So there was contact based on these loan words. But more importantly, for exploring a possible ancient Sprachbund in the Balkans, Greek and Albanian show various matching structural features or lexical features that have grammatical import. And I'll list a few here. The use of the Indo-European modal negator me, which in Albanian has the form mos, from mequid, and Greek me. The use of this modal negator to introduce tentative main clause questions. This is found in ancient Greek, also modern Greek, but that's irrelevant for this moment. So it's found in ancient Greek and in Albanian, but as best I can tell, nowhere else in Indo-European. So in Albanian, you can say mos e njihniat, do you perhaps know him? Use of mos as a question word. Ancient Greek, e me poufaste from the Odyssey, surely you do not think. A kind of tentative question. So that's one feature, kind of lexical but grammatical as well. An aspect of the structure of the verb we find in Albanian active endings in the non-active past tense, ulava. And so also in ancient Greek, epluthein, where the n is an active ending, the the is what makes it non-active. So I washed, or I washed myself, or I was washed. A third is the independent preposition me, meaning with, occurring in Albanian and, in this case, in modern Greek. This has no exact parallel anywhere else in Indo-European. Me does occur as the nucleus of forms like meta and Gothic and Germanic myth. Now, modern Greek me is supposedly from meta via a resegmentation or reanalysis of meta as me plus ta as the article. But that has always struck me as a rather ad hoc explanation. It's true that kata gives rise to simply ka, but that's highly sporadic and doesn't gain currency in the same way that me seems to have been so successful. So I just wonder if perhaps me is an archaism. It's not attested in ancient Greek as such, though there is, it occurs as a piece of a word, like in mekre or mekris. But I wonder whether me is an archaism that has been part of Greek for a long time, just simply not attested until medieval Greek. If that's the case, then both Albanian and Greek with me would be unique within Indo-European as having an unextended me, meaning with, as an independent adverb or adposition. As for the lack of attestation, I know that's a problem, but there are long unattested old forms like Hezekian eor, meaning daughter or female cousin, which seems to come from Swesser. It's clearly old, but attested only very late in Hezekias, so that can happen. If that's the case, then we can say that ancient Greek and Albanian converge on a matter of syntax, that is the use of me, a matter of verbal structure, the form of the non-active past tense, and prepositional usage, if my account of me is accurate. So we wonder, could these be contact-related points of convergence indicative of an ancient Sprachbund based on what we see with Greek and Albanian? Alternatively, are these just Indo-European dialect features? Is this just a way in which Greek and Albanian form a subgroup within Indo-European, quite apart from the issue of a Sprachbund or language contact? So the question that needs to be asked at this point, is there any reason to think that Albanian and Greek might have a dialectal affinity within Indo-European? Now, the usual view of Indo-European dialectology does not link Albanian and Greek into any sort of special subgroup, certainly not by any of the usual Indo-European dialectological diagnostics. For instance, with regard to the merger of O and A, Albanian shows it, Greek doesn't. The merger of velar K with palatal K, Albanian does not show it, but Greek does show it. The use of the augment for the past tense, Albanian supposedly doesn't show it, but Greek does. The vocalization of laryngeals from vowels from initial laryngeals, not in Albanian, but we do find it in Greek. So it looks like Greek and Albanian on these features at least don't match at all. And if we look at other diagnostics, we find that Greek and Armenian seem to show an affinity with regard to the prothetic vowel from laryngeals, the use of the augment, and also various lexemes like proktos, which matches yerestank perfectly. And Albanian seems to match or line up with Balto-Slavic in certain respects, in particular Vinter's law, the lengthening of a vowel before a voiced plain stop. With regard to Vinter's law, it's needed to explain forms like Albanian air, meaning air or smell, from odro with a long O. We know from Latin odor and Greek osme that we start with a short O, but for Albanian, in order to get the e in Albanian, we need to have it lengthened. We need a long O, and this looks like a Vinter's law context. For Slavic, for instance, in Russian, we see the same sort of thing with vidra for otter, from uder with a long u, whereas the short u is what we find in other languages, like in Greek, hudor. So the otter is the water thing, I guess. And that long u will explain the Russian I, for instance. So Albanian and Slavic both show this Vinter's law lengthening. Moreover, there are some seeming points of difference between Albanian and Greek that might actually be shared features that are hidden. So what I said about the augment can be reassessed because there are actually traces of augment use in Albanian that explain, for instance, the spirant, the spelled DH, intervocalic outcome of an Indo-European D in the aorist tha, meaning she or he gave, which seems to be then, if we posit the augment, then we can explain why a D ends up as the in Albanian. Otherwise, the outcome is anomalous. And there are other traces like that in Albanian. So we can reassess what we said about the augment and say that it actually is that both Greek and Albanian show the augment. But in any case, this past tense augment might not be diagnostic of a particular relationship if it's an archaism, as some have argued. That is, if all of Indo-European had an augment originally, here the use in Old Irish of the prefix no in past tense forms is perhaps telling. It's a different form, but it serves the same function as the augment. The same might be said about the matching of Albanian negative as and Greek uki, both from this Indo-European phrase ne hoiu quid, not ever or not on your life. Kogel has written about this with regard to Greek and Armenian. But here we might wonder whether it's an archaism or a dialectally restricted innovation within Indo-European. It's hard to judge, but Germanic may have a trace of this in Old Norse egi, meaning not. The phonology is not as clean as one would like, so that it may not be relevant, or it may be relevant. The book is still yet to be written about that particular detail. But it shows that maybe this matching is a matter of retention, archaism, rather than in a shared innovation. And on the other side, when the Vinter's law of vowel lengthening that Albanian shares with Balto-Slavic may turn out not to be a significant shared innovation because it seems to occur in Hittite, according to Alvin Klukhorst. And it even has a parallel in English where you get voicing before the D in bad, but a short vowel in bat. So bad, bat, voicing before, or lengthening before a voiced stop. So there are also some matchings that are real retentions, real archaisms, and so tell us nothing about a possible special relationship between Albanian and Greek dialectologically. I'll mention them, though, just in case you're thinking of them. A distinction between modal and non-modal negation. So Albanian has mos for modal and s or nuk for non-modal negation, like Greek me and u. The particular form of the modal negator, the me or meh, that we see in mo, is an archaism as well. The suppletion that we see in some verbs between present and aorist, so bring, bie, and present, but prur in the past for Albanian, matches Greek fer and enenk perfectly, but that's likely to be an archaism. Old Irish has the same suppletion. The occurrence of special endings for the mediopassive or non-active forms in the present system, the m, esh, t, matching my, psi, and tai in Greek, which we see also in Sanskrit. probably an archaism. So dialectologically, when we put all these features together, it's actually hard to make a case for Albanian-Greek affinity. And if that's the case, then the structural matchings that I mentioned earlier on could be evidence for a Sprachbund. But it turns out that there's one highly detailed and possibly more telling feature that needs to be explored, and this can be seen in the Albanian word sot, meaning today, and sonte, meaning tonight. Sonte is composed of so, whatever that might be, and a reduced form of not for night. And sot for today is from the same so and some form of dit, meaning day. And that allows for a possible, or we can suggest this as a possible analysis because a medial D in Albanian gets deleted. We see this in Latin loanwords like miec from medicus for doctor, and there are others as well involving native words. But what is so here? It could be from kya, palatal K, y, and a, kya diti, with a. Now we know that a, long a, shifts to o in Albanian. We see this in the word motor, meaning sister. There's a semantic shift, but it's from Indo-European mater, meaning mother. And this kya is what we know from Greek semeron for today, built on the word for day, amar and hamera. Mycenaean Greek has zawete, which is equivalent to later Greek setes, adictetes this year, built on kyawetes. So we have this kya there, but in Greek, at least, we have kya plus amar. Amar is an interesting word. It's restricted in Greek, in Indo-European to just Greek and Armenian. It occurs in Armenian or. Other Indo-European languages have words based on some form of the root de, extended in some ways. Latin dies, Slavic din, Sanskrit, and even dit in Albanian may belong there. So that seems to be the basis for the Proto-Indo-European word. So the occurrence of amar and or in Greek and Armenian seems to be an innovation. In Greek, moreover, we have a clear source for se in setes and za, zawete, and the se of semeron. From kya, if kya was extracted out of kya plus amer, this day, reanalyzed and resegmented as kya plus mer. Why do we have such an account? Well, there's no independent evidence for kya with a demonstrative sense, but there is evidence for ki, this, as a demonstrative. Slavic has s and Baltic has she, meaning this, for instance. And moreover, what would mer be in a word for today if it were to be combined with an original kya? So now to turn to, so that's the Greek side of things, which I think is fairly well believed by most. In Albanian, though, to turn to Albanian, what possible source is there for the a of kya? Certainly there's nothing in dit, the normal word for day. So we can posit that Albanian once had amer for day, which is found otherwise only in Greek and Armenian, and later diti, which gives dit for day, was substituted in for amer, replacing this opaque part of the composite for day with a more transparent word for day, the more usual word for day. So what I'm suggesting then is that Albanian started with kyamer in much the same way as Greek did, and we need that amer in order to get the a by this resegmentation. And we need the a in order to explain the o of sot. So there's sort of a chain here, but what it means is that both Greek and Albanian started with the form kyamer. The reanalysis of kyamer to kyamer could well be an independent development. It's I think, a relatively trivial kind of reanalysis, resegmentation that we see. So I'm not suggesting that that's necessarily an important shared feature, but the use of amer, I would like to say, is an important shared feature between Greek and Albanian, because amer is otherwise restricted distributionally within Indo-European. And given its restricted distribution, it's hard to see it as a shared retention between Greek and Albanian. Nor is it likely to be an independent innovation. Where would it have come from in each language? Nor a borrowing. It's not a cultural item that seems to be the kinds of old loanwords that we find in Albanian from Greek. So I'm suggesting here that the innovations seen in sot and sonte and semeron setes are the key to seeing an old connection between Albanian and Greek, namely the sharing of this restricted word for day, this amar. So putting all of these facts together, what can they mean? There appear to be many shared features between Albanian and Greek, but they raise some questions. Some of them are retentions, such as the form and the basic prohibitive function of mos and me, and thus they're neither dialectologically revealing nor indicative of Sprachbund-like convergence. Some of them may be borrowings if my account of me and me for with is right, but are they old or are they recent borrowings? If recent, it could be recent, of course, then it's relevant, then this me is relevant only for present-day Balkan Sprachbund. If old, then it's possibly indicative of a Sprachbund-like contact or of a dialectological link within Indo-European between Greek and Albanian. Some of these may be innovations, like the question use of mos or me. These are old, found in ancient Greek, but are they shared or independent innovations, or are they borrowings? Are they significant dialectologically, or are they significant for showing language contact? I would suggest that only the matching in sot and semeron, which shows the need for amer, is unassailably, unequivocally a shared innovation. Thus, the other old innovations may well be further evidence for a Greek and Albanian dialectological link within Indo-European. In any case, now to conclude, the examination of such shared features yields no evidence, no clear evidence for a prehistoric Sprachbund, but rather, by looking at this, we see new views emerging, not only of the contact relationship between the two languages, perhaps in the prepositional convergence involving me, but possibly also a deep, that is to say, an old dialectological connection as well, based largely on this, my analysis of this word, sot, sont, and sonte, and semeron, all pointing to shared use of this restricted word amer for day. Ευχαριστώ. Thank you.
Questions, paratiresis, rotisis? Έχουμε, Kero, yeah, three questions, short. Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah, just a little addition to what you said about the demonstrative kir. It's also attested in Hittite and Luwian as gas or tsa, and that's actually closer to home, you know, with respect to this family.
Yes, thank you. You're absolutely right. I think it has a fairly clear etymology, but you're right. It isn't restricted just to the north, as it were. Good. Thank you.
Yes, please. Jose.
Thank you very much for this illuminating paper. Very, very exciting in all respects. I have some questions. The first one is an information question. Your point about me, I don't know Albanian. Is the Albanian form only a form with finished in e? Could it be possible mes? The s having been dropped at the end?
Could it have been an original final s?
Yes.
I think I would expect the final s to drop, but
I would say.
But you would like it to be? Would an s be good?
I would passionately love the form with s, Um, because in this case you have a strong support in Greek and but fittingly enough also in Armenian. So in the case of Mehri, you quote, it is not clear whether Mehri has also an S, and Mehri is till the hand. But in Thessalian you have mes podi.
Right.
This obviously till the feet, till the foot. In this case, all the evidence of Greek speaks for a form with mes. The old forms and the recent forms like mesfa and so on and so on. If you could got with mes, it would be absolutely wonderful. As to the form, second point is your form tha, he or she gave. Well, in fact, in Proto-Greek, the original root aorist could be quietly assumed, and it is in fact attested in Boeotia, Anete.
As a root aorist.
Eh?
As a root aorist, you mean?
Yeah, if this is so, actually, we can assume, but the Boeotian forms are the proof. One has tried to explain why kain kappa and kain e, but at the end, this new evidence, always with the kain, would be fit perfectly. And a last point, this is an information question. I am surprised to hear that Winter's law could be also found in Hittite. Yeah, maybe we can.
I don't know the evidence. I was at a conference with Alvin, and he just mentioned, "Oh yeah, Winter's law. I think it's in Hittite
yeah,
too."
But it is. If only Clohor says this, it could be idiosyncratic.
Okay. That's why I couldn't give a year or a publication. This was just personal communication.
There are many good reasons to get a vowel length in Hittite without Winter law. Well, okay. And the last point. I would be very cautious about your nice point on the syncretism of bie umprur in Albanian. Yeah, because actually it is true that it is fero and enenko, but exactly the suppletism of per and hnek, with laryngal one, is attested in Avestan and may be assumed for Baltic and Slavic, when we have the forms with nes, which are taking the signification of her. In other words, the suppletism is attested directly in Avestan. We have a problem with the vowels, but the semantic is clear. And in the case of Baltic of Slavic, the fact that the verb beer has been taken up by nes speaks in favor of the existence of a prehistoric suppletism of both.
Right.
In this point, I assume that the suppletism, being extremely welcome, is not exclusive of this.
Oh no, and I didn't mean to suggest that. I meant that actually it's from a dialectological standpoint. It's interesting to see it, but it's irrelevant for the very reason that you say. It looks like it's an old feature. Yeah.
Not to point to this.
And I think Irish has exactly that also with berith and ro'uk, where the uk is from enenk.
I think that in this case it's not exactly the same.
Oh, okay.
Because for neck, we have one form with laryngal 1. And one other one with laryngal 2, Hittite, henk. To
and
which, in other words, it's not so clear. Yeah,
okay.
We can speak about. Thank you. Thank you very much. Wonderful.
Good. Yeah.
I'm afraid maybe one more, but very short.
Okay. Alles klar.
Thank you. Alles klar. Ο δεύτερος συνομιλητής είναι Παναγιώτης Φίλος από το Πανεπιστήμιο της Ιωαννίνας. Professor Panagiotis Philos of the University
I'm just a doctor.
Okay, we'll speak on topic language change and language contact in ancient Epirus and the Greek cities of South Illyria. Please.
Okay, at last. You can all see the title of my paper. To be honest, if I had the opportunity to change the title, I would go for a much more modest title, something like Squeezing Philological Blood Out of Epigraphic Stone. And I think that at the end of my talk, this will become more clear. I will skip the abstract, probably because it's not necessary. Okay, Epirus, like other hinterland territories of western and northern Greece, for instance, Aetolia, Carnania, Macedonia, was an isolated area on the fringes of the classical Greek world. Thucydides considered Epirus a non-Greek area, but other authors like Strabo or Pausanias attest to the opposite. Here one can also recall Homer's references to Dodona. On the other hand, the major geographical zone of South Illyria was characterized by the coexistence of both Illyrian and Greek-speaking populations. Note also the various southern Greek colonies along the coastline like Epidamnos, Apollonia, Orikos, and so on. Modern research has primarily focused on the linguistic nature of the local Epirotan idiom and its classification within the northwestern Doric group, for instance, Mendes Dosuna's classic from 1985, as well as on the eventual sidelining of the local variety after the emergence of a northwestern koina, followed by the gradual dominance of Attic-Ionic koine. For instance, Bubenik in 1989 has referred to that. Dodona stands out as a particular case, not only because of its numerous inscriptions, but also due to the special nature of the text of the oracular lead tablets, the lamellae. And here one can recall the recent editions by Eric Lott, which is a critical republication of what we knew up to that point, and especially Dakaris, Vokotopoulou, and Christidis from 2013. But there is also a third area of investigation, and this is related to contacts between speakers of different Greek varieties, for instance, local Epirotan versus Ilian or Corinthian in the colonies, as well as contacts between speakers of whatever forms of Greek with other languages, especially Illyrian. In general, a comprehensive description of ancient Epirus as a linguistic area remains a desideratum, but here we must also consider the problem of the scanned evidence. Here I have a map of ancient Epirus. I got it from Wikipedia. It's pretty much accurate. Of course, I could have used some other map from an academic publication, but I think that this map is more presentable. Here you can see the several cities, and they're colored according to what the person who made the map believes that the largest chunk of the population was like. I'm not sure whether it is quite accurate, but the cities which are depicted on the map did exist. A second map, which is even less perhaps reliable, but I think it's quite clear. You can see the three major parts of ancient Epirus. In the center, you can see Molossia, which was the biggest part of Epirus. To the west and southwest was Thesprotia. Both parts nowadays belong, the largest part of them belongs to Greece. And to the north, it was Chaonia, which is, most of it is in modern-day Albania. There were either minor tribes or ethne and whatever, but these were the three basic ones. Above all, it was Molossia. Now, a historical outline of ancient Epirus, because I'm not sure whether you have ever come across anything like that before. There is an early period down to the 5th century BC, marked both by the lack of any established political institutions and the founding of Greek colonies, especially Corinthian ones. For instance, Ambrakia, which is modern-day Arta. Second, there is the period of the Koinon, or League of the Molossians. It's pretty much the 4th century BC. The third period, the so-called alliance, Simachia of the Epirotans, begins in 328 and it lasts until 232. And this is marked by the reign of Pyrrhus, which was probably the most famous king of ancient Epirus. The final period of the Republican Koinon of the Epirotans lasted just over half a century, and it was brought to an end after the Third Macedonian War and the destruction of Epirus, especially Molossia, by the Romans in 167 BC. Now, the epigraphic evidence from the 6th century BC onwards shows that the native Greek inhabitants of Epirus spoke a northwestern Doric variety, but we have very few texts until the 4th century BC. By the same time, speakers of other Doric varieties, Corinthian, Ilian, started settling down in colonies alongside the coastline, Ambrakia, Buchetium, Cassope, and further up in the north, Apollonia and Epidamnos, but this is considered to be southern Illyria by most scholars. I mean, the vast majority. Another problem alongside the scant evidence is that the colonial Doric varieties belong to the Doric meteor group, or at least they were very close to it. Okay, the very nature of Philian is something that one can go on forever. But that practically means that the Doric spoken in the colonies was typologically not very far away from the local Epirotan idiom, at least as far as we know. On the basis of the above facts, what can be said of the linguistic makeup of Epirus, especially before the time of Pyrrhus, when most southern Greek colonies were absorbed into the expanding Epirotan state? And Ambrakia became, in fact, the new capital of Epirus. The capital was moved from Passaron in central Molossia down to Ambrakia by the coastline at that time. So, is it possible to locate any special features of the local Epirotan idiom within northwestern Doric? Second, is it plausible to assume the existence of local Epirotan subvarieties, perhaps along the lines of the pre-classical tribal divisions, Molossians, Kaunis, Thesprotoi, etc.? As far as A is concerned, one may reasonably argue that Epirus, like many other Doric areas, must have had some particular local features. But Epirotan Doric is primarily characterized by its lack of a number of northwestern Doric features. The two northwestern Doric features that do appear are the O stem dative singular oi instead of oi, with a long o, and the athematic dative plural in ois instead of the proper athematic in esi. For instance, we have toi askla pioi. Of course, in the previous paper, we heard that this might also be a locative. And we have agonois, ferontois instead of agosi, ferusi in Attic. One well-known inscription since the 19th century already is the inscription daimonois, or something like that, kai herosi, which comes from Dodona from the 3rd or 2nd century BC. But this Epirotan deviation or shortage of isoglosses is no surprise, given that within the northwestern Doric group, isoglosses may often be shared between just 2 or 3 epichoric varieties. This fact probably points to gradual convergence rather than an outright genetic relationship, or at least genetic relationship alone. Hence, the classification of Epirotan within the northwestern Greek group is possible even by means of these few and some other isoglosses. Bartoniek attempted to discern some local features in onomastics, even though most of these are not unique to northwestern Doric, and this must be stressed. And Bartoniek was not the first one to try to attempt this. I mean, Bechtel before him and Tumb and Kickers had tried to do something similar. So he pointed to ethnics ending in anes, like Atintanes, Athamanes, Talaianes, Arctanes, ethnics in opos, like Koilopos, and ethnics in tos, like Thesprotos or Phoinatos, even some proper names in Ios. But the example of Pharnaios, of course, seems to have a root which is originally of Persian origin, Pharna, like in Pharnakes, Pharnabazos, and so on. One can also note some plural endings in s, like omphales, but this can this be related to a genitive singular omphalos? This is something that should be discussed, I guess. Leaving onomastics aside, one could probably try to locate some other features, but not necessarily exclusive to Epirus, and I stress that again. So, on the basis of what Lot has done with regard to the Dodona tablets and Medved Dusuna's various publications, I tried to locate some features which would be Epirotan. In most cases, we assume that this could be Epirotan, but not exclusively Epirotan, on the basis of what we know about the provenance of the person, because we might have some information coming out of the context, or other markers. So apocopy was quite common for prepositions like per, par. There was lack of shortening for the diphthong a, and that was accompanied at times by the loss of the glide. For instance, pritaneon. One can also recall here words like noun and poen in other cases. An early raising of long clause e into long e, which was spelled with epsilon iota in the Euclidean alphabet, for instance, is proxenean. A change for short e into a may also be possible, but the current evidence is thin. For instance, we have forms like tine instead of tini, emen instead of emin, which corresponds to atikemoi, and an ethnonym hemaroi, which can also could correspond to a non-attested form himaroi. Moving on to morphology, we get some contracted Doric features like praxundi, which reminds us of Attic parallels, although an eo contraction is a little peculiar for Doric. And in addition, one can also recall that Attic features are normally in the mediopassive voice. A second form, lapsumai, which could correspond to Attic lepsomai, could perhaps be explained as an analogical formation on the base of the third singular atai. Alternatively, it could also be deemed an aorist subjunctive with an o, u raising, as, for instance, in Thessalian. As far as syntax is concerned, the types of the available documents, short oracular text with short elliptic syntax, or public texts often following a standard pattern, are usually not much suitable, and any firm conclusions on syntax are rather difficult. I think this requires a proper analysis of the corpora of text. Finally, the lexicon does not offer us many indications that perhaps we can tell in terms of statistics whether a word is more likely to have been used in Epirus. For instance, the word pampasia, which means property, is very common and may perhaps be associated with Epirus, at least as an area, not necessarily with the Epirotan idiom. Now, as far as the second question is concerned, whether we can talk of Epirotan subvarieties, the existence or not of these varieties cannot be proved on the basis of the current evidence. For instance, Lott has made a tentative remark in his book that the loss of the diphthong glide is common in inquiries coming from Orikos, but this might be coincidence since the number is not very big. But one cannot rule out this scenario, but it's still a scenario, given the common linguistic reality, the mountainous terrain and size of the region. I mean, nowadays we know that various areas of Epirus have some difference between each other. Examples from other Greek areas like the Argolid, Western and Eastern Argolid, Thessaly, but yesterday we heard some objections or some skepticism about that, Crete perhaps, and despite the fact that dialect geography nowadays is a concept that is questioned. Finally, the multi-dialectal oracular corpus of Dodona is a special case, but one must exploit this variegated material with due diligence, not only because part of it may relate to speakers from faraway areas, but also because of the oracular practices. For instance, some Doric texts were probably written by their oracle staff, since the Ionic names of the inquirers should point to a different direction otherwise. I mean, this is a remark made by Jaime Curbera in the appendix on onomastics in Dakaris, Christidis and Vokotopoulou two-volume publication. So much about the linguistic character of Epirus, or what we don't really know about that. Now, what about language change in ancient Epirus? Northwestern Koine is often considered an intermediate stage, disguised Koine, intermediate variety, as we heard before, in the long process of the replacement of the local dialects by Attic-Ionic Koine. In Epirus, Northwestern Koine appears as early as the 3rd century BC in both public and private inscriptions, but its character is somewhat mixed even in that early period. For instance, there is Koine, Attic-Ionic Koine influence already. For instance, we find the dative oi instead of oi, even though texts written in pure Koine are rare in general. Bubonik has made some comments, some remarks on this. In brackets, I have put something which practically means that new inscriptions, and probably new inscriptions from Dodona, and especially Ambracia, if we are lucky enough to get new inscriptions, might give us some better indications. Northwestern Doric in Epirus shows some special features in comparison to Northwestern Doric used elsewhere, for instance, Delphi. Two of the most emblematic features of Northwestern Doric, that is the dative plural in ois for thematic nouns and the prepositional phrases in n plus accusative, are underrepresented in Epirus. They're not absent, but they're underrepresented in comparison to those other areas. I have mentioned that inscription before, so I will not mention it now. As far as the first feature is concerned. As far as the second feature is concerned, we have found some additional examples in the recent publication by Dakaris, Vokotopoulou, and Christidis. All of them were deceased, of course, by that time, but anyhow. For instance, an Amprakian, first half of the 4th century BC, an Alan, end of the 5th century BC, and Olympian, first half of the 4th century BC. I don't know whether the script is big enough for you to see that, unfortunately, the endings have are either missing or are not easy to read. So one can still have some doubts about the endings, but I think that most of them make sense. Now, there's debate over possible extra-linguistic reasons behind this Epirotan differentiation. In the past, there was debate, for instance, for political reasons, the Epirotans want to differentiate from their neighbors, the Aetolians, who were their long-time enemies. But nowadays, this extra-linguistic scenario is not so much in vogue. I will move on to conduct linguistics. I will just make a short reference to it. Language conduct and dialect conduct are both conduct linguistics phenomena. Of course, here must also keep in mind that sometimes it's difficult to distinguish between languages and dialects, but can produce different results since extra-linguistic factors are also involved. Speakers and their attitudes, ideology with respect to the linguistic and or dialectal varieties, both on an individual and community level, identity issues, local, ethnic, cultural, religious, etc., socio-political, cultural, religious, and other contexts. As mentioned before, the Epirotans came into early contact with the speakers of Corinthian and Teleia, and it's also a fact that normally the citizens of the Greek colony spoke a dialect akin to, if not almost identical to, the dialect of their respective metropolis, at least in the earliest periods. Hence, is it possible to detect traces of inter-dialect conduct in pre-Hellenistic Epirus? So far, no firm evidence, not only because of the lack of appropriate documents, but also because of the proximity of these dialects, the colonial and the indigenous ones. Perhaps Ambrakia is the most likely place to offer some relevant evidence because not only it's a place where we have got some early inscriptions, and if we get in the future more, we might be lucky enough to see in the transitional period when it was about to become the capital of Epirus, or even before probably, some small signs of this conduct, but this is basically a hope rather than a fact. Now, contact with Illyria was prolonged in the northern parts of Epirus, which bordered southern Illyrian lands, note also the presence of Corinthian colonies farther up north, which formed part of the original linguistic makeup too. But given the actual absence of Illyrian texts to date and the thin evidence about Illyrian in general, one has to look for evidence in the Greek texts. The features to look for would primarily be case of code switching, interference, accommodation, and borrowing, including hybrid formations, perhaps conscious or not, because when it comes to bilingualism, hybrid formations are usually conscious formations, in contrast to what happens in bidialectalism, where it might be just a matter of hypercorrection or whatever, but as we heard before, that's not always the case. But little hope in that direction too. By contrast, onomastics, especially proper names, and to a lesser extent place names, has been the primary field of investigation to date. Marisa Del Barrio yesterday mentioned something similar about the Black Sea. Some recent studies like Masson 1987, Caban 1993, I mean, it was that special volume on the Greek Illyrian onomastics. Lot in the 5th conference on Southern Illyria and Epirus in 2011, Courbera in Dakaris in 2013 point to the infiltration of Greek into the Illyrian population, which is in stark contrast with the small number of Illyrian names, just 12 names for certain, plus some other possible names in the lamellae of Dodona. As far as I remember, there are 1,200 or 1,400 personal names in Dodona, and only 12 of them are Illyrian for certain. Given that we practically know nothing about Illyrian syntax and little about the other Illyrian fields, phonology, morphology, semantics, the best option is the field of borrowing, including hybrids, but note also possible case of interference, accommodation, etc. in onomastics. For instance, some ethnic names in Buthrotos, such as Genwaioi, which is spelled in different ways as well, and Temoi may point to Illyrian roots, probably, that could have taken on Greek suffixes. At least that's what Lot has argued for. Note here that the later phenomenon of Greco-Latin bilingualism in Epirus is not a proof by any means, but it's quite interesting that although Epirus was practically depopulated by the Romans, you might remember what Polybius says, that 150,000 Epirotans, Molossians, were dragged as slaves back to Rome, which means that practically nobody had been left back in Molossia, or almost like that. And although the Epirus was colonized by the Romans later on, especially after the naval battle at Actium, it is quite noteworthy that even in places where the population at the beginning was predominantly Latin-speaking, like Nicopolis or Buthrotos, which was repopulated by the Romans, soon enough, Greek became the dominant language in written speech as well. This might show something about the prestige of Greek in general, not, of course, of the local idiom in the area. Finally, something which I tended to do, but I realized that would be impossible to do here, is that Epirus can be compared with other areas of the Greek world where monodialectalism, monolingualism was not the norm even before the Hellenistic period, unlike what most books and authors say for most of the time, that before the Hellenistic period, Greeks were practically monolingual. So here one can recall cases like Cyprus, Sicily, the Black Sea, and perhaps also Crete, Pamphylia, and Marseille, Massalia in the past, where we had Greeks living next to people speaking other dialects or languages. And here we can see the conclusions, but I will stop here because I think we have run out of time. Thank you very much.
Έχουμε 6 λεπτά, so please, questions, observations. Jose?
Sorry, I speak too much. Thank you very much for your paper. It's a very nice, very fair approach to the problem and very suggesting. I just 2 remarks, critical remarks. When you speak about anes, yeah, that's what, probably these are not Greek suffixes, and I am not sure that this could be conclusive for the classification of the language of Epirus. You have in Mycenae, you have Pakiyane, yeah, and Pakiyane.
So in which area?
In Mycenaean. Sphagianes, in Pylos. So in other words, I assume that the term is pre-Greek. It is the general view. And you cannot take this as a piece of evidence for this, yeah? I am sure there are Roy has written something about this long article in Minos we can speak about. And the second point, I would say, be cautious about the term Illyrian. Illyrian could be a region, could be people. We are Illyrian, yeah, but the language is an invention. And Kronasser has shown a long time ago that Illyrian is the level all the peoples east of Istria receive. And if you say somewhere at the end of your nice paper, you say Illyrian roots, so if there is a lexem, you need a sense. And you have an etymology. And I would say, I would suggest not to compromise your work with these labels, which are no help. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Sorry, can I ask you a question? I mean, when you say anes is probably not of not Greek origin, what do you think of Chantren's etymology of the Greeks? Then, do you relate that of Chantr, like Hellenes?
Yeah, I don't think it is Greek, but maybe okay. I would say. Would it get difficult, yeah?
Okay.
Have a look on the material. Roy has written a monumental big book about article on the subject, yeah?
Okay, okay, thank you.
In any case, even if it would be Greek, because it's very nice, Aharnanes, I assume you cannot demonstrate that anes is Greek suffix. But even if this would so, it is not only, it is also Mycenaean. Also, and the extension of the names in anes is too broad to operate with it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, please.
Only a question of information. Did you ever find or encounter the name of the Graiki?
Excuse me, which name?
Of the Graiki. That the Romans named the Greek from the Graiki.
I have some noise behind me.
No. The Greki.
The Latin. Yeah. You mean the Latin name spelled in Greek letters?
Yeah.
Yeah, the original one. Okay,
yeah. Did you ever find something from the Greki?
No, I haven't come across that. I mean, I cannot recall. Perhaps. No, I have no recollection of this, to be honest. That doesn't mean anything, of course, but no. Do you have some information on this, perhaps? That's good for us. Grajoj.
Grajkoj. Well, I take privilege of my chair. I was always intrigued by Chaonia. Chaonia, is it something you encounter or you have any elucidation? Chaonia meaning
About the etymology?
Etymology, yes.
But, I haven't checked that. I think the etymology of the names is... I don't think... I haven't come across any particular study on this, I mean, special study on this. Perhaps someone else might know something more.
Any other? Still, δύο λεπτά. Please. Yes, Yanni?
Yeah, I would like to just comment that it has been nice that we hear a paper on this area. I don't know of many other studies recently which dealt with this issue. So it's time to get together whatever evidence we have and try to interpret it, especially now that these Dodona lamellae are out and all together we can have some better picture perhaps of the area. And of course, in a few minutes, we'll hear Professor Dosuna on that, and he might have some more things to say and contribute to this general area. This little corner of Greece, of ancient Greece and modern Greece, which has been neglected in many ways in linguistic studies. So, thank you very much for your contribution.
Yes, I think that Julian Mendes Dosuna has done most of the work on ancient Epirus, but I wanted to see some of this data in a different perspective in relation to Epirus. I'm not sure whether we have enough evidence, but I just wanted to put together everything we know. Practically, it's Julian on the one side, and it's the Pierre Caban team in France on the other side, who work on southern Illyria and Epirus as well. But I just want to try to put all this work together in a different perspective. That's what I try to do. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to disconnect everything.
Otritos mas sinomilitis, thaine o Cafiitis, Julian Mendes Dosuna, apotopen epistelia tis Madrigas. Our last speaker of this session is Professor Julian Mendes Dosuna, who will speak on the topic, the Dodona tablets, open questions.
Oh, it's not here. How stupid. Oh. The document is missing. I don't know.
So I must confess that I'm quite tired and hungry, and I guess that you are hungry and tired too. All right. Well, some of you may wonder why I'm reading two papers in this conference. When I received and accepted Yorgos Giannakis' initial invitation, I submitted the abstract of my paper of yesterday. But last March, he requested me to talk about the oracular tablets from Dodona, since he believed that the topic was far too important to leave it out of a conference on the dialects of Central and Northern Greece. After some reluctance, I accepted readily. That's why I'm here. My affair with the Dodona tablets began many years ago when I was writing my PhD on the northwestern Doric dialects, in which, much to my regret or to my shame, these texts, the texts from Dodona, played a rather secondary role. At the time, Sotiris Dakaris, Iulia Vokotopoulou, and Tassos Christidis were preparing their edition of the tablets found in the excavations directed by Dimitris Evangelidis in the late 20s and early 30s of the 20th century. Tassos Christidis spotted my book on the northwestern dialects, I think through José Luis García Ramón. I'm not sure, but I think he was the go-between. Then he contacted me, and eventually we became friends in spite of the fact that I am xenos, sour, as he used to tease me. In 2004, he sent me a preliminary version of the text, to which I responded with some comments and criticism. Unfortunately, he died untimely at the end of the same year, before he could see published the Dodona text. I'm completely sure that if he were alive, the edition would have been somewhat different and more to the point. He would be addressing you here in my place. So, in a sense, I feel like an ersatz speaker. All the previously published texts from Dodona were gathered by Eric Lout in his excellent 2006 edition. The Evangelidis tablets finally saw the light last year, thanks to the efforts of Sotiris Tselikas, who managed to bring the work to a completion after the death of the editors. Lout's corpus consists of some 200 texts. Dakaris, Vokotopoulou, and Christidis contains more than 4,200 texts, which for the most part are published here for the first time. All the texts, or most of them, are short or very short. They are often lacunary and have no context at all. While collective official inquirers always identify themselves, individual private inquirers rarely reveal their provenance and frequently opt for complete anonymity. Thus, in trying to identify the origin of an inquirer, we must rely more often than not on the dialect features exhibited by the text, which sometimes implies a vicious circle. These are the dialects which have been identified. Most of the texts are Doric, presumably from the areas near Dodona or from southern Italy. There are also some texts in Attic, Ionic, Euboean, or in the Koine. It's not always easy to separate them. There are also some texts from Thessaly in the three varieties of Pelasgiotis, Thessaliotis, and Histiotis. A few archaic texts are written in Boeotian, and we may have a couple of texts from Macedonia, but this is not quite clear. For lack of time, I shall restrict myself to enumerate some of the most intractable problems with which the editors of these texts were confronted. Being tantalizingly short, fragmentary, and entirely lacking context, many texts are extremely difficult to read and or to interpret. So some readings of the edition of Vaccaris and the others are dubious. Another great difficulty is the dating of the text. In fact, this is possibly the most apparent flaw in Vaccaris, Vakotopoulou, and Christidis' edition. The tablets provide no reference to datable historical events. And the lettering is not always of great help in this type of text. Finally, quite a number of tablets presents us with contradictory dialect features. When this mixture is real, it is open to different interpretations. The problem of dialect mixture is closely related to another question. Who wrote the enquiries and the answers of the oracle? Were the inquiries themselves or someone from the sanctuary? These and other problems will be tackled by an international multidisciplinary team which has been recruited by Pierre Bonnecher, an historian from the University of Montreal in Canada. In the last part of my talk, I shall present my Dodona top 10. That is, the most important data found in the tablets. Of course, these are my choices. In all probability, you would have selected other data. It is completely biased. Well, number 10, an inquiry written in Thessalian has provided us with a new instance of a third plural aorist with the ending N, characteristic of this dialect. Number 9, the feminine of the participle of the verb eimi is eassa in an inquiry written in the local variant of the Corinthian alphabet, dated to the end of the 6th century. Of course, similar forms are attested in Arcadia, Messenia, and Crete. But a more intriguing variant occurs in an inquiry dated to the mid-5th century. The context unequivocally indicates that this is a feminine of the participle of the verb eimi. But, to the best of my knowledge, the type eontha stands in splendid isolation. It is precisely this isolation which makes it difficult to interpret. Is this a special and parallel outcome of the sequence NT-yard? Or have we to do with a misspelling? For the time being, the answer is unclear to me. Oh dear. Oh, this is unexpected. Well, number 8 is the digamma in the verb eao, let go, allow. The existence of the consonant was previously known thanks to a couple of Hesychian glosses, which have a beta or a upsilon. I think the Hesychius has evason with beta and eva with epsilon, but the digamma is, as such, is here attested for the first time. The form bucolo, a dative singular in a Boeotian inquiry, is interesting in two respects. First, if not a trivial instance of letter omission, this is the first piece of evidence of the contraction of the diphthong O in Boeotian. Second, this is also one of the rare examples in Boeotian of a thematic dative singular with loss of the second element of the diphthong. Number 6 is the form epipasis. In the 2006 conference on the ancient Greek dialects, which took place in Athens, I proposed that Boeotian epasis is the apocopated version of epipasis, this form, rather than an assimilated variant of emphasis. We have also one instance of the Attic Ionic equivalent, epictesis, in another tablet. In an interesting Boeotian text, a couple asks what they should do in order to have a male heir who could remain, that is, who could reach adulthood. According to the editors, they inquire about the safety or security of their properties. They think that epinguasis is the Boeotian equivalent of an unattested Attic form, epinguasis. But epinguasis is not the right term for safety, which is asphaleia. This term should mean something like additional surety. It is also problematic from the point of view of phonetics, since the raising of a short a before a nasal is unprecedented in the Boeotian dialect. For these reasons, I prefer to read epipasis, which looks like a hybrid of epipasis and epasis. Now, in several inquiries written in Doric, we find some forms in which the sequence eo is contracted, which, as Panagiotis Philos said, is quite rare in the Dorian domain. A case in point is this tablet. The text is undoubtedly Doric to judge from the accusative of the second person singular pronoun tu or tu, the numeral ikati with no assimilation, and the Doric future lapsumai. Another example is found in this tablet, in this inquiry. The Biliones seem to be an epirotic tribe, and Praxunti is another Doric future with a contracted sequence. Number 4 is occupied by two new Doric forms. One is the adverb satei, clearly related to other form meaning this year, attested in different dialects. The other novelty is the accusative of the name of the ship. The form nan was not previously attested in any inscription or literary text. It is the expected one, but we knew of it thanks to an information by Herodian. Number 3 is a syntactic archaism, the construction of the preposition ana with the dative expressing location on the top of something, or with the accusative expressing motion onto the top of something was preserved in Epirus. Apart from the epic from Homer, elsewhere, both constructions were replaced by a P with the dative or with the accusative. This is the text printed by Eric Loud for our consultation in Doric. He interprets that we have a modal particle an and an aorist apetile. And this is my revision of the text with a quite different reading of the third line. I also modified Loud's dating. So the sense of the inscription is rather different, and I read a prepositional phrase «Anton keleta to Dorilau», meaning onto Dorilau's fast-sailing boat. In another Doric text, Vakaris Okotopoulou and Christidis read, sorry. This is just to create a little suspense. So, in this text, Vakaris Okotopoulou and Christidis read a modal particle combined with a form which could be a subjunctive, which makes little sense. I prefer to read a prepositional phrase with ana, meaning anladoni, meaning on the upper part of the ladon, which could be a river or a place, who knows. And we are in number 2, which might be a ghost. Well, we attest 3 dialect variants of the modal particle in the Dodona consultations. As expected, the particle ka occurs in texts written in Doric, Boeotian, and in the Thessalian variety of Histiaiotis. An is Attic Ionic, and ke occurs in Thessalian consultations from Pelagiotis and Thessaliotis. More surprising is the use of the particle in some texts which do not conform to Attic practice, to Attic use. Since the subject is too complex, I limit myself to giving a few examples. First, to all appearances, the potential optative can dispense with the modal particle in questions. This is not unknown in Attic texts. More interestingly, we often find the particle in contexts where it is unexpected. We have already seen the case of this tablet in which the modal particle an is a mirage. In another text, the editors read a subjunctive combined with a modal particle ka. But the combination of a deliberative subjunctive, which belongs in the realm of the Antic modality, with the modal particle, which is a marker of epistemic modality, is unlikely. To get rid of this unwanted construction, we could think of a contraction of kai and an aorist, emartureuse, meaning did Libisabos gave testimony as well. A similar case is found in a Thessalian text. It apparently combines the modal particle ke and a deliberative subjunctive. I think that this must be a mistake, and the writer must have had in mind an optative sotheie like some lines below. No, sorry. He copied the subjunctive found some lines below. My last example occurs in a consultation written in Ionic or in Attic. Here we find again the anathematized combination, the modal particle an and a subjunctive ginontai. Should we interpret it as an indirect interrogative introduced by an? Well, this type of indirect indirect interrogatives are extremely rare in Attic, and they seem to occur only in very restricted contexts. If this were so, this new piece of evidence might give support to a currently less popular etymology of Attic Ionic ean, which was advocated in the past by different scholars, notably Schwitzer and De Bruna. I reserve the top of our top 10 for the 8 inquiries written in the poorly attested Thessalian vernacular of Histiotis. The new texts are short, but they confirm the evidence of previously known inscriptions. I humbly present them to the great Thessalian Tagoi, José Luis García Ramón, and Bruno Elie. I give you an overview of the main dialect features. Some are pan-Thessalian, like the raising of the primary mid-long vowels. The sequence R-or, with long R, remains uncontracted in the endings of the genitive plural of the first declension, but not in the article. The ordinal first has a long O, protas, like in Attic, and not an A, like in Doric. The preposition peri undergoes apocope. The conditional conjunction is I, as expected. And we attest one instance of psilosis in a grammatical word, osper, instead of expected hosper. The last 4 features are more interesting in that they are exclusive to Histeiotis, vis-à-vis Pelagiotis and Thessaliotis. Oh, the modal particle is ka, like in Doric. The ending of the third plural optative is oin, like in Northwestern Greek. The negative me has become ma, written with an alpha. And finally, the characteristic fronting of O to E in word final syllables after dental and palatals is attested in several tablets. Thank you.
If you are hungry, we can adjourn, but feel free to ask questions. Yes, Jorgo.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to thank Professor Dosuna for accepting present this paper. And indeed, it was very late when I asked him to do it. Thank you very much.
A pleasure.
Short question, Jose?
Yeah,
No question. Feel free.
Yeah, not a question, simply enthusiastically adhere to what Georgios has said. It's absolutely immense thanks. Yeah, and maybe I could add, it is, I assume we are all glad that the former extravagant forms of Estaiotis basaidae now are so wonderful present. Thank you very much. Yeah?
I thank you.
Wow. I'm also grateful to the speaker. Any questions you want to ask?
Everyone is tired.
Everybody's hungry. Piname. Dipsame.
Then if no questions, let's go and eat.
Yes, okay.
Thanks.
The meeting is adjourned.